when some wag said it's feasible to think responsibly about one thing and not the other. Well, I could see from that one sentence that that was perfectly ridiculous. And it pushed me further into my natural drift, which was into learning all the big ideas and all the big disciplines.
Have you ever paused to truly wonder why we do the things we do? Why do we feel what we feel, remember what we remember, or, act the way we do under pressure?
It's a fundamental question, isn't it?
It really is. It's arguably one of humanity's oldest and most profound quests. This relentless desire to understand ourselves, our motivations, the very fabric of our subjective experience.
Yeah.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into that very quest. The vast, intricate, and utterly fascinating world of psychology, the scientific study of mind and behavior.
Right.
Our mission is to give you a true shortcut to being well-informed about this incredibly dynamic and, ever-evolving field.
That's the goal.
We're going to journey through how psychology sort of emerged from philosophy, what it really studies, the big ideas and overarching perspectives that help us explain ourselves, and some of the landmark discoveries and brilliant minds that completely reshaped everything we thought we knew about the human condition.
And what's truly compelling about this deep dive, I think, is that it's designed to offer you more than just facts. Our aim is to spark genuine aha moments, maybe reveal some surprising insights into everyday things, and provide a clear, structured understanding of human behavior without, feeling overwhelmed by information overload.
Exactly.
You'll gain a powerful new lens, hopefully, through which to view your own thoughts, your actions, the choices you make, and the complex behaviors of the people around you. It's about building a deeper, more informed intuition for the human experience.
Absolutely. And to do that, we've meticulously crafted this deep dive from a comprehensive overview of psychology, drawing from sources that cover its major subfields, the foundational theoretical frameworks that have shaped its thinking, pivotal experiments that kind of shook the world and redefined our understanding, and the brilliant minds who weren't just researchers but really trailblazers who forged this discipline into a rigorous science.
Yeah, laid the groundwork.
So let's unpack this intricate landscape. Psychology isn't just one monolithic thing, is it? When many people hear psychology, they often immediately think therapy or maybe mental health.
That's a common association, yeah.
And while clinical practice is certainly a vital and highly visible part of the field, it's just one piece of a much larger, incredibly diverse and interconnected city, you could say, with many different neighborhoods, each exploring a unique aspect of the human experience. It's a whole spectrum, really, from the microscopic study of neurons all the way to the broad sweep of societal influence.
You've hit on a crucial point there. While these neighborhoods or subfields are incredibly diverse in their specific focuses and, their methodologies, they all share a common unifying goal: to scientifically explain how and why humans, and often other animals too, think, feel, and act.
Right.
Each subfield approaches this fundamental question from a different vantage point, you see, employing distinct tools and asking unique questions, but always striving for scientific rigor and empirical understanding.
Okay, let's start our exploration in what feels like the bustling, analytical downtown of cognitive psychology. This is the branch that fundamentally examines our internal mental processes: how we perceive the world, the mechanics of our memory, how we acquire and use language, how we solve problems, and how we make decisions.
It's the inner workings.
Exactly. At its core, cognitive psychology is about unraveling the mystery of how do we acquire, process, store, and retrieve information. It's the mechanics of our inner intellectual world.
Right. And to delve a bit deeper, cognitive psychology explores the precise mechanisms of our attention, why we filter out so much information and what actually captures our focus. It meticulously maps the intricate mechanics of memory, distinguishing, for instance, between the fleeting capacity of short-term or working memory, what lets us hold a few bits of info in mind right now, and the vast enduring archives of long-term memory.
Okay.
It also investigates why we forget, exploring concepts like decay, interference, or retrieval failure. Why can't I remember that person's name?
Happens all the time.
Exactly. Furthermore, this field reveals fascinating insights into how we navigate complex problems and make choices, shining a light on phenomena like cognitive biases, those systematic errors in thinking that subtly affect our judgments, often without us even realizing it.
Like what? Can you give an example?
Sure, like the anchoring effect, where the first piece of information you get, even if it's totally irrelevant, can profoundly sway your later decisions.
Okay, I see that.
And of course, a huge and complex area of study here is how language is learned, understood, and used, exploring everything from sounds and grammar to meaning.
This field really exploded after the 1960s with what's widely known as the cognitive revolution, right? Which was a direct, powerful reaction against behaviorism's strict focus on only observable actions.
Absolutely, a major shift.
It courageously brought the study of the mind and these internal mental processes back into the realm of scientific inquiry. And the analogy often used here, which I find incredibly helpful for understanding its perspective, is the information processing model, comparing the human brain to a sophisticated computer that encodes, stores, and outputs information.
The useful analogy, yeah.
Not perfect, but it offers a powerful framework.
It truly does. And the insights derived from this model have been profound, leading to a sophisticated understanding of different memory systems and the stages of information processing. A compelling aspect of this field today is its close integration with neuroscience.
Right, the brain science part.
Exactly. Many cognitive psychologists use advanced brain imaging techniques like fMRI and EEG to literally peer into the living brain, observing the neural basis of thinking, memory, language as these processes unfold in real time.
Wow.
This interdisciplinary approach allows us to connect the abstract world of thought to its biological underpinnings, revealing the complex interplay of mind and brain.
Okay, next, let's swing over to the more foundational yet still incredibly influential neighborhood of behavioral psychology. Here, the focus is squarely on observable behaviors and the processes through which we learn.
Back to basics, in a way.
Yeah, it's all about how the environment and our experiences shape our actions, built on the core idea that all behaviors, from simple habits to complex reactions, are acquired through conditioning through our interactions with specific stimuli and the resulting consequences in our environment.
This approach held immense sway, didn't it? Dominating psychological thought for much of the first half of the 20th century, with pivotal figures like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner at the forefront.
The big names in behaviorism.
Definitely. They meticulously demonstrated principles of learning. First, classical conditioning, famously studied by Ivan Pavlov.
Pavlov's dogs.
Exactly. Showed how a neutral stimulus, like a bell, can become associated with an involuntary reflexive response, like salivation, simply by being repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus, such as food.
Learning by association.
Precisely. Then there's operant conditioning, championed by Skinner, where behaviors increase or decrease depending on the consequences they produce.
Rewards and punishments.
You got it. For instance, a behavior followed by a reward or positive reinforcement is likely to be repeated, while one followed by punishment is less likely. A behaviorist would meticulously analyze how can we precisely use reinforcement to encourage desired behaviors or strategically apply consequences to reduce unwanted ones. They weren't really interested in what you felt, but what you did.
While pure behaviorism began to recede as the dominant theoretical framework by the 1950s, largely due to the cognitive revolution's emphasis on internal mental processes, its legacy is absolutely undeniable and profoundly enduring, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Its techniques are still mainstays in therapy, education, parenting.
Right, like token reward systems in classrooms, where kids earn tokens for good behavior.
Perfect example. Or exposure therapies for phobias, where individuals are gradually and systematically exposed to what they fear to unlearn that fear response.
So it has real practical applications.
Huge practical applications. And its emphasis on empirical rigor, focusing only on what could be directly observed and measured, was a radical shift. It undeniably set the stage for psychology's development as a truly scientific discipline, moving it away from pure introspection or philosophical speculation.
That makes sense. So, building on that idea of change, how do we understand the vast, often profound changes that happen to us throughout our lives? This seems like a good transition to developmental psychology.
It is. This vital subfield is the scientific study of how individuals change and grow across the entire lifespan, from the very earliest stages of prenatal development through infancy and childhood, into the complexities of adolescence, and continuing through adulthood and even aging. It's a dynamic field that recognizes change as constant.
And importantly, it's not just about babies and kids, although that's a significant part of it.
Definitely not. Developmental psychologists are deeply interested in fascinating questions like, how do fundamental cognitive abilities, such as language acquisition or reasoning skills, develop in children? Or What are the typical emotional and social changes that occur as we navigate different life stages,
Yeah.
like forming identity in adolescence, or adapting to new roles in midlife, or even confronting cognitive shifts and transformations in old age?
And the classic nature versus nurture debate fits in here too, right?
Absolutely. How our genetic predispositions, our innate biological blueprint, interact with our environmental experiences to shape every facet of our development. It's a dynamic interplay, not an either-or.
Okay.
And a hugely influential figure in this realm was Jean Piaget. His theory of cognitive developmental stages revolutionized our understanding of how children think.
Right. He had those stages.
Yes.
Sensoromotor, preoperational.
Exactly. Sensoromotor, preoperational, concrete operational, and formal operational. His core, groundbreaking insight was that children think in qualitatively different ways than adults, not just less or slower. Well, for instance, a preoperational child might struggle with conservation of liquid volume, believing a taller, narrower glass holds more simply because it looks higher. They focus on one dimension.
Ah, I remember seeing that.
Developmental psychology also meticulously studies variability, looking at the origins and impacts of developmental disorders or the profound effects of early life experiences, such as the formation of attachment bonds in infancy, or the long-term consequences of childhood trauma on later outcomes.
So it covers a lot of ground.
It really does. The profound insight here is that humans are not static beings. We are constantly evolving, adapting, and transforming. Understanding those continuous changes is absolutely essential for explaining behavior at any given age.
Now we move into a subfield that many people immediately associate with the term psychology, clinical psychology.
Yes, the therapy side.
Exactly. This is the branch primarily concerned with mental health and mental illness. It's truly where the science of mind and behavior powerfully meets real-world practice, aiming to rigorously assess, deeply understand, effectively treat psychological disorders, and ultimately improve overall well-being and life functioning for individuals.
It's a very applied subfield. It dynamically integrates scientific research, theoretical frameworks, and practical clinical application to alleviate psychological distress and promote mental health. Clinical psychologists often work directly with clients suffering from a vast array of issues.
Like anxiety or depression.
Exactly. Common problems like anxiety disorders, depression, or addiction, but also more severe psychiatric conditions. They grapple with complex questions. What are the multifactorial causes of mental illness? Is it biological factors, a history of adverse life experiences, maladaptive cognitive patterns, or some combination?
Right, it's usually complex.
Always. And which treatments, such as evidence-based approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or psychodynamic therapy, or even medication management in collaboration with psychiatrists, are most effective for specific disorders and individual needs?
So they might help someone challenge negative thoughts.
Precisely. Or assist an individual with a severe mental illness in learning crucial coping skills and improving their social functioning. The field has evolved significantly, from early psychoanalytic approaches to the rise of CBT, and more recently, third-wave therapies like ACT or DBT, which integrate mindfulness and acceptance strategies.
Historically, clinical psychology emerged from early, often quite primitive efforts to treat abnormal behavior and mental distress, which sadly often involved institutionalization or even harmful interventions.
A difficult history in some ways.
Yeah. Pioneering figures like Sigmund Freud, with his revolutionary psychoanalytic therapy emphasizing unconscious conflict, and Carl Rogers, with his client-centered therapy emphasizing empathy and unconditional positive regard, laid crucial, if sometimes controversial, foundations for understanding and treating mental disorders.
Foundational figures, no doubt.
Today, clinical psychologists are highly trained professionals who draw on a wide, eclectic range of theoretical frameworks: psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, humanistic, family systems, and often work in diverse settings, including hospitals, community mental health clinics, universities, and private practice, always with a focus on evidence-based treatment.
And the ultimate goal of clinical psychology is undeniably clear and profoundly impactful: to alleviate suffering, restore adaptive functioning, and ultimately improve individuals' capacity for a meaningful and fulfilling life. This makes it one of the most visible and widely recognized subfields of psychology,
Absolutely.
with the direct, tangible, and often life-changing impact on millions of lives globally. It really stands at the intersection of science and compassionate care.
Next up, we're stepping into the incredibly dynamic and often surprising realm of social psychology. This field explores how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. It really highlights the profound power of interpersonal and group dynamics in shaping our individual actions and collective beliefs, often in ways we don't fully realize.
Oh, this stuff is fascinating. Social psychologists are deeply interested in fundamental questions that impact our daily interactions. How do we form our initial impressions of others, and how accurate are they?
Good question.
Right. Why do we so often conform to group norms even when we might privately disagree? Or why do we obey authority figures, sometimes against our better judgment?
We'll get to some famous studies on that later, I bet.
We will. What are the root causes of prejudice, discrimination, or aggression? And conversely, how can we foster pro-social behaviors like altruism and cooperation? This subfield frequently designs ingenious experiments to isolate and understand how subtle situational factors can powerfully affect our actions.
Like the bystander effect.
Exactly. Research into the bystander effect revealed why the presence of others can sometimes lead to apathy in emergencies rather than help. Or consider how social pressure, famously demonstrated by Solomon Asch's conformity experiments, can lead someone to publicly agree with a group's wrong answer, even when they know it's incorrect.
It's amazing how strong that pressure can be.
It's a field that often uncovers counterintuitive truths about human nature.
What's particularly striking here is the sheer profoundness of social influence. It's not just about direct commands, is it? People's behaviors and beliefs can be subtly, yet strongly, shaped by peer pressure, implicit cultural norms, and even the roles they are assigned,
Roles are huge.
as demonstrated in many classic studies we'll discuss later. It's a powerful, sometimes unsettling reminder that we are not isolated islands. Our identities, our attitudes, and our actions are deeply defined by our interactions with others and the social context we inhabit.
This leads to a crucial understanding. To fully comprehend human behavior, it simply cannot be understood in isolation from its social context. It is absolutely vital to consider the intricate web of interpersonal influences and the broader societal structures that are constantly at play.
It's all connected.
Completely. Our interactions, the groups we belong to, and the pervasive culture around us shape so much of what we do and who we become. This is why social psychologists study everything from persuasion and propaganda to attraction and group dynamics, aiming to understand the hidden forces that connect us.
Okay, finally, for this section on subfields, let's delve into the intricate inner workings with biological psychology, often referred to as behavioral neuroscience or neuropsychology.
Getting down to the hardware.
Yeah, exactly. This field is dedicated to uncovering the direct links between biological processes from the cellular level of neurons to the systemic level of hormones and psychological phenomena. The fundamental question here is, how do the brain, the nervous system, our genes, and other biological systems underpin every single one of our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and behaviors? It's all about connecting the mind to its physical, organic foundation.
Biological psychologists and neuroscientists rigorously explore questions like, what precisely happens in specific brain regions when we form a new memory, or when we experience intense fear, or even when we're falling in love?
The big question.
Right. How do our genetic predispositions interact with our environment to influence our personality or susceptibility to mental health conditions? And how do hormones, neurotransmitters, and other biochemicals in our bodies regulate our mood, motivation, and cognitive functions?
And they have fancy tools now, right? Like brain scans.
They do. They employ cutting-edge tools like functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, which measures brain activity by detecting changes in blood flow, electroencephalography, EEG, which measures electrical activity, and transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, which can temporarily activate or deactivate brain regions to literally peer into the living brain,
Wow.
observing its activity as we engage in different mental tasks. Discoveries in this field have illuminated, for instance, which specific brain areas are critically involved in language processing insights often gained from studying individuals with brain injuries or strokes, or how neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine profoundly affect our mood, sleep, appetite, and motivation.
This field has truly exploded in recent decades with the rapid advancements in technology, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Modern brain imaging allows researchers to observe which brain regions light up during different mental tasks, offering an unprecedented dynamic view into the inner workings of our minds. It's also inherently highly interdisciplinary, overlapping significantly with fields like neurology, pharmacology, genetics, and even evolutionary biology.
So it's not just about healthy brains.
Not at all. Biological psychology also explores the devastating impact of brain injuries, providing crucial clues to mapping specific brain functions or investigating how our immune or endocrine systems interact with the brain to influence our stress response, sleep cycles, and overall physical and mental health.
That's fascinating.
A profound insight from biological psychology is the core idea that every psychological event is, at its root, also a biological event.
Mind and body are connected.
Fundamentally, for instance, the experience of an emotion isn't just a subjective feeling. It corresponds to specific, measurable patterns of brain activity, the activation of neural circuits, and the release of various chemicals. Biological psychology has been absolutely instrumental in validating psychology as a rigorous hard science and has directly led to groundbreaking treatments, such as the development of psychiatric medications that target specific neurotransmitter systems.
But it doesn't discount experience, right?
Not at all. It works hand in hand with other perspectives, recognizing that our environment and experiences also profoundly shape our biology through processes like neuroplasticity, where the brain can actually reorganize itself. It adds a crucial, tangible layer of depth, looking at neurons and networks, to complement purely behavioral or cognitive explanations.
Okay, you can already see just how diverse and interconnected the field of psychology is, right? These subfields provide a roadmap for what psychologists investigate, carving out specific domains of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's pivot and explore the different lenses or schools of thought that have emerged throughout psychology's history. These are the overarching conceptual frameworks that help researchers and practitioners make sense of what they find, guiding their interpretations and shaping their questions.
The big picture ideas.
Exactly. And here's where we truly dive into the intellectual currents that have shaped how we understand ourselves. Throughout its relatively short history as a science, psychology hasn't just had one unified way of looking at things. Different schools of thought or major theoretical frameworks have risen and sometimes fallen, often emerging in direct response to or even in opposition to prevailing ideas.
Competing views, often.
Yeah. These aren't just theories, they're comprehensive ways of seeing the entire human condition, each with its unique assumptions about what drives us.
Precisely. We can define these as overarching perspectives that fundamentally guide how psychologists frame their questions, interpret behavior, and understand mental processes. While many modern psychologists adopt an eclectic approach, meaning they integrate elements and insights from multiple perspectives to gain a richer understanding.
Combining the best bits.
Sort of, yeah. But grasping these foundational frameworks is absolutely key to understanding the big ideas and historical trajectory of psychology. Each offers a distinct, often profound explanation for human behavior. One might emphasize unconscious drives, another learned habits, or yet another are patterns of thought.
Let's start with one of the earliest and arguably most famous and influential, psychodynamic or psychoanalytic theory, pioneered by the visionary Sigmund Freud.
Freud. Can't talk psychology without mentioning Freud.
Right. He introduced the truly revolutionary idea that much of human behavior is deeply influenced by unconscious drives, conflicts, and pivotal childhood experiences. This was a radical departure from previous philosophical or medical thought, suggesting that vast parts of our mental life operate beyond our conscious awareness and control.
To connect this to a deeper understanding, Freud proposed a complex model of the psyche, which he divided into three interacting structures. The primitive, instinctual id, driven by the pleasure principle.
The impulsive part.
Exactly. Then the rational ego, which mediates between the id's demands and external reality, and the moralistic superego, which internalizes societal rules and standards, our conscience, basically.
Id, ego, superego.
Got it. In this framework, psychological distress, such as anxiety or depression, often arises from unresolved, unconscious conflicts between these forces, particularly those stemming from early childhood experiences. He also introduced the concept of defense mechanisms, like repression, where we unconsciously push distressing thoughts or memories out of awareness to protect the ego.
So we hide things from ourselves.
That was the idea. Therapeutic techniques like dream analysis, where dreams are seen as a royal road to the unconscious, or free association, where patients say whatever comes to mind, were meticulously designed to bring this hidden unconscious material to consciousness, which was believed to be the pathway to alleviating symptoms.
While specific Freudian theories, particularly his emphasis on psychosexual stages, have faced significant criticism and modification over the years, his immense contribution remains undeniable, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He was groundbreaking in suggesting that much of our mental life operates outside conscious awareness, forever changing how we perceive human motivation.
And he basically invented talk therapy.
Right. Establishing the very practice of talk therapy for mental illness was revolutionary at the time. His influence permeates popular culture, giving us terms like Freudian slip, highlighting how deeply his ideas have impacted our understanding of everyday behavior. It's a powerful reminder that emotions, early relationships, and hidden motivations, even if not fully conscious, can profoundly affect our behavior and well-being.
And modern therapies still build on this.
Yes, modern psychodynamic therapies such as attachment theory continue to build on these foundational insights, focusing on early relational patterns and their lasting impact.
Okay. Next, let's turn to behaviorism, often referred to as learning theory. This perspective emerged in the early 20th century as a powerful, deliberate reaction against the introspective, unobservable focus of Freudian ideas and other mentalistic approaches.
A complete swing in the other direction.
Right. Pioneering behaviorists like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner rigorously argued that psychology should be a science of behavior, not of mind. They asserted that to be truly scientific, psychology must study only what can be directly observed and objectively measured, dismissing internal mental states as irrelevant or unknowable.
The core tenet of behaviorism is elegantly simple, yet profoundly influential. All behavior is explained by learning from the environment. They posited that all organisms, including humans, adjust their actions based on the associations they form and the consequences that follow.
Watson famously and controversially stated that he could take a dozen healthy infants and, given his own specified world, shape them into anything he desired, whether a doctor, a lawyer, or even a thief, purely by controlling their environment.
Very bold claim.
Extremely bold. It powerfully underscored their belief in the overwhelming power of experience and conditioning over innate traits.
Delving deeper, behaviorists meticulously focused on two key forms of learning. First, classical conditioning, as meticulously discovered by Ivan Pavlov. We talked about the dog.
Right, the bell and salivation.
Exactly. Where a previously neutral stimulus acquires the capacity to elicit a reflexive response simply by being consistently paired with an unconditioned stimulus which naturally elicits that response. Think about how certain smells can trigger strong emotional memories because they were associated with a significant past event.
That makes sense.
Second, operant conditioning, extensively championed by B.F. Skinner. This involves learning through rewards and punishments. Behaviors followed by positive consequences, reinforcement, are strengthened, while those followed by negative consequences, punishment, are weakened.
So consequences drive behavior.
That's the core idea. Skinner's groundbreaking work with Skinner boxes meticulously demonstrated that different schedules of reinforcement, whether continuous, fixed ratio, variable ratio, etc., can profoundly influence how quickly and persistently behaviors are learned and maintained. Explains everything from why we compulsively check our phones for notifications to the addictive nature of slot machines.
Ah, the variable ratio schedule.
You got it.
A defining and often criticized feature of behaviorism was its resolute dismissal of internal mental processes like thoughts, feelings, or intentions as being outside the realm of scientific study. They famously treated the mind as a black box, didn't they?
They did, focusing solely on the observable inputs, stimuli, and outputs, behaviors. Yet, its legacy is undeniable and immensely practical. Behaviorism provided psychology with a robust, empirical foundation and developed highly effective techniques for learning and behavior change that are still widely applied today.
Like systematic desensitization for phobias.
Exactly, where anxiety responses are gradually unlearned, or the widespread use of token economies in educational and clinical settings. These are direct descendants of this framework. Behaviorism's enduring big idea is that environment is an extraordinarily powerful shaper we are, to a very large extent, products of what we learn and the contingencies of our surroundings. By the mid-20th century, specifically the 1950s, a powerful new perspective began to emerge, driven by dissatisfaction with the perceived pessimism of Freud's focus on unconscious conflicts and the mechanistic reductionist view of behaviorism. This was humanistic psychology, often termed the third force in psychology.
The third force, right. Spearheaded by visionary figures like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow.
This framework profoundly views people as inherently good, or at least fundamentally neutral, possessing an innate drive towards growth and positive development. It places a strong emphasis on self-actualization, the profound lifelong drive to realize one's fullest unique potential.
So it's more optimistic.
Much more optimistic. Humanistic psychologists explore questions like, what are the conditions that foster a truly fulfilling life? How do individuals experience meaning, creativity, or authenticity in their lives? Focus on external control, humanistic psychology emphasizes conscious experiences, free will, personal responsibility, and the inherent human capacity for self-reflection and positive change. It's about empowering the individual.
Carl Rogers, for instance, developed client-centered therapy,
Yeah.
right? Which sounds very different from psychoanalysis.
Totally different. It was a revolutionary approach that moved away from the therapist as an authoritative expert and towards a collaborative relationship. He stressed the therapist's role in providing core conditions: empathy, deeply understanding the client's perspective; genuineness, being authentic; and unconditional positive regard, accepting the client without judgment.
Creating a safe space.
Exactly. This approach aimed to create a safe, supportive environment where individuals could explore their feelings and find their own solutions, fostering self-acceptance and growth. Abraham Maslow, on the other hand, proposed his famous hierarchy of needs.
The pyramid. I remember that from school.
That's the one, a pyramid model of human motivations. It ascends from basic physiological needs like food and water through safety, belonging, and esteem, culminating in the pinnacle of self-actualization. Maslow didn't just study psychological distress. He meticulously studied healthy, creative, and highly functioning individuals like Albert Einstein or Eleanor Roosevelt as exemplars of self-actualized people, showcasing what reaching one's full human potential might truly look like.
So they looked at the positive side of humanity.
Precisely. This humanistic perspective brought much-needed attention to intrinsically positive human qualities: creativity, compassion, empathy, resilience, personal growth, which had largely been overlooked by other schools of thought. It truly laid the intellectual groundwork for the later emergence of positive psychology, a field specifically dedicated to studying happiness, strengths, and human flourishing.
And its impact is still felt today.
Oh, profoundly.
Yeah.
Especially in areas like counseling, education, and organizational leadership, where understanding intrinsic motivation and fostering individual potential are paramount.
Okay.
Ultimately, humanistic psychology profoundly redefined what it means to be human within the discipline of psychology. It portrayed individuals not merely as subjects driven by unconscious urges or mechanistic conditioning, but as active agents capable of self-directed change, purposeful growth, and the profound pursuit of meaning. It highlights a crucial question: how do we truly foster and nurture human potential? Humanistic psychology provides a compassionate and empowering lens for that very inquiry.
Shifting gears again, let's turn our attention to cognitive theory, a framework that became profoundly prominent in the 1960s and 70s, igniting what's known as the cognitive revolution.
Bringing the mind back.
Exactly. This framework dramatically and successfully reintroduced the study of internal mental processes back into the scientific study of psychology, having been largely excluded by behaviorism. It fundamentally treats the human mind as an active information processor.
The core idea that underpins cognitive theory is deceptively simple, yet immensely powerful. Our thoughts, or cognitions, profoundly influence and often determine our behavior and emotions.
So how we think affects how we feel and act.
Precisely. Consider a common scenario. Two individuals experience the exact same setback, perhaps a job rejection. One might interpret it as a devastating personal failure, leading to deep despair and withdrawal. The other, however, might interpret it as a valuable learning opportunity, a chance to refine their approach, fostering resilience and prompting them to try again.
Same event, different interpretation, different outcome.
Exactly. Cognitive psychology meticulously asks questions like, how do we form, store, and retrieve memories? And why are our memories often fallible? Or, how do we efficiently solve complex problems? And why do we sometimes become biased in our judgments or decision-making? It also examines the intricate mental strategies we employ and how information is organized in our mind through conceptual structures known as schemas.
Influential figures who profoundly shaped cognitive theory include Jean Piaget, we mentioned him,
Right, in developmental psych.
and Noam Chomsky, who argues that language acquisition involves inherent innate mental rules, directly challenging behaviorism's view that language was simply learned through conditioning.
A big challenge to Skinner.
Yeah. The classic mind is computer analogy, where we understand complex mental processes by comparing them to software operations like encoding, storage, and retrieval, is a hallmark of the cognitive model.
Still a useful metaphor.
Yeah, it provides a useful framework, even as we acknowledge the brain's biological complexity goes far beyond a mere silicon machine.
And this powerful framework forms the theoretical bedrock for cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is now a hugely effective and widely utilized form of psychotherapy.
CBT is everywhere now.
It really is. CBT directly targets and helps individuals challenge and change maladaptive thought patterns and dysfunctional beliefs to alleviate emotional distress and improve behavior. Cognitive psychology's overarching idea is that to truly understand behavior, we must delve into the internal mental processes that underlie it. Our minds actively construct and shape our reality, rather than passively recording it.
And it's still very influential.
Extraordinarily influential today, seamlessly integrating with neuroscience to form the vibrant field of cognitive neuroscience, and profoundly informing everything from how we design user interfaces for technology to how educators teach critical thinking and problem-solving skills in the classroom.
Our final theoretical lens for this deep dive is evolutionary psychology, a more recent but rapidly growing framework that gained significant prominence in the 1980s and 90s, though it firmly builds on the foundational ideas of Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection.
Looking way back.
Yeah, it asks a compelling fundamental question. How have our behaviors, our cognitive processes, and our emotional predispositions been shaped by the relentless forces of natural selection to solve the adaptive problems faced by our ancestors throughout humanity's deep history?
Evolutionary psychology operates on the core assumption that many, if not most, universal human psychological traits from our emotional responses to our social behaviors exist today because they conferred some survival or reproductive advantage in our evolutionary past.
Helping our ancestors survive and reproduce.
Exactly, helping them survive, mate, and pass on their genes. In this view, the human mind is not an all-purpose blank slate. Rather, it has evolved as a collection of specialized modules or adaptations designed to solve recurrent problems.
Like fear of spiders or heights.
Precisely. Common innate fears like the fear of spiders or heights might be explained as adaptive responses that protected our ancient ancestors from genuine environmental dangers. Similarly, evolutionary psychologists examine phenomena like universal mating preferences, patterns of parental investment, the dynamics of aggression, or the surprising prevalence of altruism, all through the powerful lens of their adaptive value in our ancestral environments.
What's particularly intriguing within this framework is the concept of mismatch theory. What's that about?
This idea suggests that the human brain and our evolved psychological mechanisms developed over vast stretches of time in a dramatically different ancestral environment, often referred to as the Pleistocene era.
The hunter-gatherer days.
Right. This can help explain some seemingly irrational or problematic behaviors in modern life, for example, why we still possess an almost insatiable craving for sugary and fatty foods.
Which makes sense back then, but not so much now.
Exactly. They were incredibly scarce and valuable energy sources in the past, but are now abundant and contribute to obesity. Or why our deeply ingrained stress responses, perfectly suited for escaping a saber-toothed tiger, are often ill-suited for the chronic, low-level psychological stressors of a modern desk job.
Our bodies haven't caught up with modern life.
In some ways, yes. This framework often adds an ultimate explanation, asking why might this behavior or mental trait have evolved in the first place, to complement the proximate explanations offered by other perspectives, which focus on immediate causes like learning or brain activity.
It's another layer of explanation.
It is. While evolutionary psychology is sometimes controversial when its concepts are oversimplified or misapplied, its core insight is crucial. The human mind is profoundly shaped by its evolutionary history. It's not a general-purpose blank slate waiting to be filled. Rather, it has been sculpted by evolutionary forces to prioritize certain types of information and respond in specific ways.
So it helps explain universal patterns.
Yes. Understanding these deep ancestral influences can clarify why certain patterns of behavior and cognitive biases are universal across cultures, or why our brains respond the way they do in specific, often primal situations. It compels us to look at our modern behavior through a very ancient lens, providing a powerful layer of understanding to the complex puzzle of human nature.
Fascinating, right? These frameworks offer wildly different yet often complementary lenses through which to view human behavior. And often modern psychologists integrate elements from multiple perspectives for a richer, more holistic understanding.
The eclectic approach we mentioned.
Exactly. But beyond these grand theories, psychology also grapples with some core human experiences that cut across all areas, fundamental aspects of our mental lives that we all share but might not fully understand.
The really basic stuff.
Yeah. So after exploring the distinct subfields and the grand theoretical lenses, let's now truly unpack some of the most fundamental concepts that touch nearly every branch of psychology. These are the universal aspects of our mental lives, things we all experience daily but might not consciously dissect. These are the underlying building blocks of our subjective reality, and understanding them provides profound insight into ourselves.
Absolutely. These are truly fundamental topics that are so universal and significant to the human condition that they warrant focused, in-depth explanation. They represent the bedrock upon which our entire psychological experience is built, and exploring them offers a unique perspective on what it means to be human.
Let's begin with perhaps the most perplexing and elusive of all: consciousness.
The big mystery.
Right. We typically define it as our moment-by-moment awareness of ourselves and our environment, encompassing all the thoughts, feelings, sensations, and memories of which we are currently aware. It's often referred to as the hard problem of consciousness. How do purely physical processes within the brain give rise to the subjective, qualitative experience of being me, the vividness of seeing red, or the feeling of sadness?
Historically, early psychologists grappled with this. William James, a pioneering American psychologist, famously described consciousness not as static states, but as a continuous, ever-changing stream, a dynamic flow of thoughts and sensations.
Like a river of thought.
Exactly. Sigmund Freud, as we discussed, added layers to this by distinguishing between conscious, preconscious, and unconscious levels of the mind, dramatically bringing attention to the vast amount of mental activity that happens entirely outside of our immediate awareness.
Stuff happening below the surface.
Right. States of consciousness themselves vary widely, from our ordinary waking awareness to the distinct altered states we experience during sleep, vivid dreams, hypnotic trances, or drug-induced states. Modern neuroscientists actively investigate questions like what precisely is happening in the brain when we are consciously aware versus when we are unconscious, such as during a coma or deep sleep.
Can they see consciousness in the brain?
Well, they can see patterns of activity associated with it. Research has identified critical brain regions, particularly parts of the cerebral cortex and the thalamus, that appear to be essential for conscious awareness, acting as a kind of global workspace where information is integrated.
And cognitive psychologists explore fascinating phenomena that challenge our intuitive understanding of consciousness. For example, the role of attention is crucial, right?
Yeah.
As what we consciously perceive is heavily influenced by where we direct our attention.
Absolutely. Consider cases like blind sight, where individuals with certain types of brain damage report no conscious visual experience in parts of their visual field, yet they can still accurately guess the location or orientation of objects within that blind field.
Perceiving without awareness. That's wild.
It's a striking example of perception happening without conscious awareness, offering clues into the modularity of brain function.
So is there agreement on what consciousness is?
There's an ongoing, vigorous debate about how to precisely define consciousness and what its ultimate evolutionary function might be. Some theories propose it serves to integrate vast amounts of information for planning and decision-making, while others suggest it might be a more emergent byproduct of complex neural activity. Regardless, consciousness remains a profoundly central concept in psychology because it is inextricably tied to our sense of identity, our personal narratives, and our very experience of reality.
It's fundamental to being human.
Exactly. Understanding consciousness is paramount to understanding what makes us uniquely human, and it continues to be one of psychology's most challenging and captivating frontiers.
Next, let's explore emotion. Those powerful, often overwhelming drivers of behavior that color our entire existence.
Can't live without them.
Right. Emotions are widely described as powerful, multifaceted experiences characterized by a dynamic interplay of physiological arousal, observable expressive behaviors, and distinct subjective feelings. We instinctively recognize and share universal emotions like joy, profound sadness, intense anger, debilitating fear, startling surprise, and visceral disgust, even if the specific cultural triggers for these emotions can vary widely.
Emotions are, without a doubt, absolutely key drivers of our behavior, profoundly shaping our decision-making, our perceptions, and our interactions. Fear, for instance, might powerfully drive us to escape danger or freeze in place, while feelings of love or attachment might inspire profound caregiving and bonding behaviors.
And there are different theories about how they work.
Oh, yes. Historically, various theories have attempted to answer the fundamental question, what exactly is an emotion and how does it arise? The James Lange theory from the 1890s proposed a counterintuitive idea that emotion is a result of our bodily reactions, meaning we feel afraid because we tremble, rather than trembling because we feel afraid.
Body first, then feeling.
That was their idea. The Cannon-Bark theory, developed later, argued that emotion and physiological arousal happen simultaneously, both triggered by the brain's processing of a stimulus.
Happening at the same time.
Right. And Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory offered a compelling cognitive twist, suggesting we interpret our physiological arousal in context. The same racing heart might be labeled excitement at a concert, but anxiety during a stressful exam, depending on our cognitive appraisal of the situation.
So our thoughts matter in labeling the feeling.
Crucially, yes.
Beyond these classic debates, modern neuroscience meticulously examines how emotions are generated and regulated in the brain. The amygdala, that small, almond-shaped structure deep within the limbic system.
The fear center, often called.
Right, it's widely recognized as being crucial for processing fear and other emotionally salient stimuli. Furthermore, groundbreaking work by psychologist Paul Ekman famously identified 6 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, surprise, and anger, which he found to have universally recognized facial expressions across diverse cultures.
Suggesting they're innate.
Likely. This suggests these core emotional expressions are probably hardwired and possess an evolutionary origin, serving as vital signals for social communication and survival.
It's crucial to understand that emotions are not just abstract feelings in a vacuum. They involve the whole organism. They manifest as changes in our heart rate, breathing, hormone levels. They influence our subjective feeling tone and our perception of events. And they often culminate in observable outward expressions like smiles or frowns.
The whole body experience.
Definitely. A rapidly growing field, affective science, now rigorously investigates how emotions impact our mental and physical health. Chronic stress and negative emotions, for instance, can demonstrably harm the body's physiological systems over time.
Stress kills, as they say.
Well, it certainly takes a toll. While positive emotions like happiness, gratitude, and awe have been consistently linked to better health outcomes and increased resilience, Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory suggests that positive emotions don't just feel good. They actually broaden our thinking, increase our creativity, and build lasting personal and social resources.
So positive feelings actually help us function better.
That's the idea. Emotion is a core psychological concept because it permeates and colors every single part of human life: our motivation, our interpersonal relationships, our worldview, and our overall well-being.
Our journey into the fundamental aspects of the mind continues into memory, that astonishing mental time travel device that allows us to revisit the past and carry it forward.
Where would we be without it?
Exactly. Memory is the complex mental process of encoding information, getting it into our brain, storing it, keeping it there, and then retrieving it, calling it back to conscious awareness. At its most basic, it's what allows us to learn from experience, to form our unique personal identity through the rich tapestry of recollections of our life events, and to carry vital knowledge forward in time, enabling us to function effectively in the world.
Psychologists often break down memory into different types and stages to better understand its complexities. A commonly used model conceptualizes information first entering a brief sensory memory, which holds fleeting sensory impressions. If attended to, this information then moves into short-term memory or working memory.
Like holding a phone number in your head.
Exactly, which has a limited capacity and duration. With rehearsal or a sense of importance, information can then be encoded into vast, enduring long-term memory.
Okay, and long-term memory has types too.
It does. Long-term memory itself is further divided. Explicit memory, also called declarative memory, which involves conscious recall, includes episodic memory, memories of specific events and experiences, like your last birthday, and semantic memory, general knowledge and facts, like the capital of France.
Things you know you know.
Right. Then there's implicit memory, also called non-declarative memory, which operates largely outside conscious awareness. This includes procedural memory, skills and habits like riding a bike or tying your shoes, and memories formed through classical conditioning, where a learned association influences behavior without conscious recall.
Things you know how to do, but can't easily explain.
Exactly.
But here's where it truly gets captivating and perhaps a little unsettling. Extensive research has powerfully demonstrated that memory is not like a perfect video recording, simply playing back past events verbatim.
Oh, definitely not.
Rather, it is fundamentally reconstructive and often highly fallible. Pioneering psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, for example, has done groundbreaking work showing that memories can be remarkably distorted, altered, or even entirely implanted through misleading information.
It's a misinformation effect.
Yeah. In her famous car crash studies, she showed that simply changing one word in a question, asking participants how fast cars were going when they smashed, versus contacted could dramatically alter their recollection of the event, leading them to remember broken glass that was never there.
Wow. Just one word.
Just one word. This has profound implications for things like the reliability of eyewitness testimony in legal settings and our very understanding of how malleable and susceptible to suggestion our memories truly are.
On the neurobiological side, we know that memory formation involves remarkable neural changes at the synaptic level. The classic saying, neurons that fire together wire together, eloquently captures this principle of long-term potentiation, where repeated activation strengthens neural connections.
The brain physically changes when we learn.
It does. Specific brain structures are crucial. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobe, is absolutely essential for forming new explicit memories. Damage to the hippocampus, famously seen in the case of patient HM, can cause severe anterograde amnesia, rendering individuals unable to form new long-term memories.
They can't make new memories.
Exactly, essentially trapping them in the present moment. Early foundational work by Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 1880s painstakingly quantified memory processes, meticulously mapping out the forgetting curve, which demonstrates how we rapidly forget newly learned information unless it's reinforced.
Use it or lose it.
Pretty much. He also described the spacing effect, where recall is better when learning is spaced out over time rather than crammed, and the serial position effect, our tendency to remember the first and last items in a list better than those in the middle.
Okay, so circling back to our cognitive psychology lens, we can readily view memory through that information processing analogy, comparing it to a computer system. We have to successfully encode information, type it in, store it on a hard drive, save the file, and later retrieve it. Open the file.
A useful model.
And failures in memory can happen at any of these stages. We might not encode something well in the first place due to lack of attention, or the memory trace might decay over time, or it can be interfered with by new information, or we might simply be unable to retrieve it, leading to that frustrating tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon.
We've all been there.
Oh, yeah. Memory retrieval is also often context-dependent. Being in the same physical environment, emotional state, or even olfactory context as when a memory was formed can act as a powerful cue for recall.
Like going back to your childhood home brings back memories.
Exactly.
So a monumental insight from memory research is that memory is profoundly constructive and surprisingly fallible. Our brains don't simply replay. They piece together memories from scored fragments, influenced by our current knowledge, expectations, and even desires. This is why two people can genuinely remember the same event quite differently.
Our memory isn't objective reality.
Not at all. Memory is the incredible mental time travel that seamlessly allows past experience to guide and inform our present behavior. It's a field that beautifully bridges biological, cognitive, and even social psychology, making it an incredibly vibrant and active area of research that touches every aspect of our lives, from learning to our very sense of self.
Finally, let's explore perception, the remarkable process through which our minds construct our individual reality. To clarify a crucial distinction, sensation is merely about detecting raw physical stimuli through our sensory organs, our eyes picking up light, our ears detecting sound waves, our skin registering pressure.
The raw input.
Right. But perception is the far more complex, active process of the brain's organization and interpretation of those raw sensory inputs to make them meaningful. It seeks to answer profound questions like, how do we instantly recognize objects, faces, or even emotions from mere light patterns or sound vibrations? Or why do optical illusions so easily trick our seemingly sophisticated visual system?
A fundamental truth illuminated by decades of research is that perception is not a passive reception of information. It is an incredibly active, constructive process. Our brains do not passively receive an exact objective copy of the world. Instead, they vigorously build a coherent, usable representation of it.
So we're constantly interpreting.
Constantly. This means that what we perceive can vary significantly from person to person and is profoundly influenced by our internal state, our expectations, our prior knowledge, and the immediate context. If you've ever misheard song lyrics and then, once corrected, couldn't unhear the correct version.
Oh yeah, happens all the time.
Or if you've seen a random cloud formation that looks exactly like a dragon, you've personally experienced the mind's powerful tendency to impose patterns, fill in gaps, and use context to actively construct its reality.
The Gestalt psychologists in the early 20th century were absolutely instrumental here, weren't they? Figures like Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, and Wolfgang Kohler.
The Gestalt pioneers.
They rigorously studied how people naturally organize visual elements into meaningful wholes rather than just isolated parts. They coined foundational principles like figure ground.
Separating object from background.
Closure, where we mentally fill in gaps to perceive a complete shape. And continuity, where we perceive smooth, continuous patterns rather than disjointed ones. Their famous saying, "the whole is greater than the sum of its parts," perfectly captures this idea, right?
Absolutely. Our perception of an overall form isn't just a sum of sensory bits, but something emergent and organized by the mind. They also extensively explored depth perception, meticulously showing how our visual system allows us to perceive a three-dimensional world despite the flat, two-dimensional images projected onto our retinas, utilizing cues like binocular disparity, the slight difference in images seen by each eye, and various monocular cues. Classic visual cliff experiments with infants famously demonstrated that depth perception is largely innate or develops very early.
What's particularly fascinating here is how our perceptual constancies enable us to recognize objects as stable despite changes in sensory input.
Right, like shape constancy or color constancy. For instance, we perceive a door as remaining a rectangle, even when its image on our retina is trapezoidal due to our viewing angle, shape constancy. Or we perceive an apple as red under various lighting conditions, color constancy.
Our brain corrects for the changes.
It does. And sometimes our active perceptual system gets it wrong, leading to compelling optical illusions, like the Miller-Lyer illusion, where two lines of the same length appear different due to arrowheads, or Rubens' vase, which can be seen as either a vase or two faces.
Illusions aren't just tricks.
No, they provide invaluable clues to the brain's rule-based mechanisms for constructing perception. They show us the shortcuts and assumptions the brain makes.
Perception is also heavily influenced by where we direct our attention. We literally don't perceive things we aren't attending to, as famously demonstrated in studies on inattentional blindness, where people fail to notice an obvious stimulus if their attention is elsewhere.
Like the gorilla in the room experiment.
Exactly. And our prior experience, our schemas, and our expectations constantly shape how we interpret ambiguous stimuli. In cognitive terms, perception involves both bottom-up processing, which is data-driven, starting from the sensory input and building up to a perception,
Data coming in.
and top-down processing, which is concept-driven, where our existing knowledge, expectations, or context influence how we interpret the sensory data. Think about reading a handwritten scribble as either 13 or B, depending on whether it's surrounded by numbers or letters. The context, top-down, guides your interpretation of the raw visual data, bottom-up.
Top-down influences are powerful.
Very.
Ultimately, perception is our mind's fundamental interface with reality. Everything we know about the world outside of us comes through this incredible active process of perception. It's not just about what hits our senses, but how our brain interprets, organizes, and gives meaning to that raw information.
So our reality is a construction.
An active, ongoing mental construction, constantly being updated and influenced by our inner world. This concept beautifully links cognitive, biological, and even social psychology, showing how our minds actively shape what we see, hear, and understand, often influenced by social biases like stereotypes, which act as powerful top-down influences on our perception of others.
Okay, so after traversing the theoretical landscapes and fundamental concepts, what does all this profound theoretical understanding look like when put into action? How do we, as a scientific discipline, know these things to be true?
Right, where's the proof?
Exactly. Well, that brings us to the game-changing experiments and the brilliant minds behind them. These are the studies that profoundly influenced our understanding of human behavior and even fundamentally altered the course of psychological research and practice.
These aren't just historical footnotes either. These studies dramatically revealed often surprising aspects of human behavior and, often transcend their original context to become part of our broader cultural understanding of ourselves. They represent pivotal moments in psychology's history, providing empirical bedrock for the theories we've just discussed, and often sparking entirely new avenues of inquiry.
Let's start with a foundational classic that redefined learning, Pavlov's dogs. The pioneering work on classical conditioning. We mentioned it earlier.
But it deserves a closer look.
Definitely. This was actually an accidental yet brilliant discovery by the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s. He wasn't even studying psychology. He was meticulously researching canine digestion, observing how much dogs salivated when they ate. But he noticed something peculiar.
The dog started salivating before the food arrived.
Exactly. They started salivating not just at the taste of food, but even at the sight of the lab assistant who usually fed them, or the sound of the food cart rattling down the hall. Their bodies were anticipating.
Intrigued by this psychic secretion, Pavlov pivoted his research. He meticulously set up controlled experiments where he would ring a bell, a neutral stimulus, just before presenting dogs with food. After a number of these bell-food pairings, the dogs began to reliably salivate upon hearing the bell alone, even with no food present.
So the bell became associated with food.
Precisely. He termed the food the unconditioned stimulus, UCS, because it naturally, unconditionally elicited salivation. The salivation to food was the unconditioned response, UCR. The bell, initially neutral, became the conditioned stimulus, CS, because through association it came to elicit salivation, now a conditioned response, CR, even without the food. This elegantly demonstrated a fundamental form of learning. Automatic reflexive responses could be consistently modified by experience and learned associations.
This finding was absolutely pivotal. Concepts like conditioned stimulus, unconditioned stimulus, and conditioned response, and the now ubiquitous Pavlov's bell metaphor didn't just enter the vocabulary of psychology. They permeated everyday language.
They really did. It provided the first systematic scientific evidence that even complex emotional or physiological behaviors could be learned through simple associations. It revolutionized our understanding of how habits form, how phobias develop, and even how our bodies learn to anticipate events.
Its impact was immense then.
Oh, huge. Forming a cornerstone of the behaviorist movement and providing a powerful explanatory framework for a wide range of human phenomena. For instance, classical conditioning helps explain why a particular song can evoke strong emotions if it's associated with a significant past experience, or why someone who experienced a panic attack in a specific location might develop anxiety just by returning to that place.
It even has practical uses.
Definitely. It underpins practical techniques like using conditioned taste aversions to protect livestock from poisonous plants by associating a mild illness with a particular food, or how moisture-sensitive alarms can effectively treat nocturnal enuresis, or bedwetting, by associating bladder fullness with an awakening stimulus. Pavlov's meticulous experiments demonstrated that learning by association is a fundamental, pervasive way organisms adapt to and predict their environment.
Next, we have the Little Albert experiment, a highly influential yet deeply controversial study from 1920 on conditioned fear.
Controversial is the word.
Yeah. Conducted by the pioneering behaviorist John B. Watson and his graduate student Rosalie Rayner, their explicit goal was to demonstrate that emotional responses, specifically fear, could be classically conditioned in humans, directly extending Pavlov's work to an infant.
Their methodology was meticulous, albeit ethically problematic by today's standards. They began by exposing a 9-month-old baby, known pseudonymously as Albert B., to various common stimuli, including a white laboratory rat, a rabbit, a dog, and various masks and fur coats.
And he wasn't scared at first.
No, little Albert initially showed no fear of the white rat, even reaching out to touch it. Then the conditioning began. Watson and Rayner repeatedly paired the presence of the white rat with a sudden, loud, startling noise made by clanging a metal bar with a hammer just behind Albert's head.
Oh, wow. Poor kid.
Yeah, naturally, the loud noise made the baby cry and show signs of fear. After just several pairings of the rat plus the loud noise, little Albert reacted with intense fear and distress at the mere sight of the white rat alone. Even without the accompanying noise, he would immediately cry, tremble, and try to crawl away.
And the fear spread.
It did. Furthermore, this fear generalized to other visually similar fuzzy white things. He became frightened of a white rabbit, a fur coat, and even Watson's own Santa Claus beard.
This experiment dramatically and undeniably demonstrated that a phobia, an irrational and intense fear response, could be created through classical conditioning. Albert learned to associate a harmless animal with a aversive, frightening noise.
Exactly. It provided powerful empirical evidence for the behaviorist's claim that emotions, like fear, are not necessarily innate or arising from deep unconscious conflicts, but rather are learned responses shaped by environmental associations.
While ethically it remains a stark cautionary tale, they intentionally induced fear in a baby with no attempt to decondition him, and he was removed from the study by his mother shortly thereafter.
A huge ethical problem.
This study provided crucial empirical support for Watson's claims about the power of conditioning. It profoundly informed later behavioral therapies for anxiety disorders and phobias, specifically suggesting that if fears can be learned through association, they can also be unlearned or counter-conditioned.
Like exposure therapy again.
Right. Techniques like systematic desensitization, where a fear response is gradually replaced with a relaxation response, directly stemmed from these foundational insights. It solidified the idea that classical conditioning applies profoundly to human emotional behaviors, strongly bolstering the behaviorist view that environment is a powerful, even primary shaper of our internal and external responses.
Okay, let's turn to Bandura's Bobo doll experiment, a true game changer for our understanding of learning, moving beyond simple conditioning.
This one's about kids watching adults,
Yep.
right?
Yes. In 1961, Albert Bandura, a social cognitive psychologist, conducted this seminal study to demonstrate how children learn not just through direct reinforcement, but powerfully through observing others' behavior. Preschool-age children were divided into groups and watched an adult model aggressively interact with an inflatable clown doll known as a Bobo doll. The adult would punch, kick, and hit the doll, often yelling specific aggressive phrases like, "sock him in the nose."
And then they watch the kids.
Exactly. After observing the adult model, each child was then placed individually in a playroom that contained a Bobo doll and other toys. The results were striking and highly influential. Children who had observed the aggressive model imitated many of the same aggressive actions they had seen, even repeating the specific phrases the adult had used.
So they copied the aggression.
They did. Children in a control group who had not seen the aggressive model were much less likely to engage with the Bobo doll aggressively. Bandura further showed that if the observed model was punished for their aggression, the children were less likely to imitate the behavior, whereas if the model was rewarded or unpunished, imitation was more likely. This process, where individuals learn by observing the consequences of others' actions, is known as vicarious reinforcement or punishment.
This experiment provided striking, undeniable evidence for Bandura's social learning theory, which posits that people, especially children, can acquire new behaviors simply by observing and imitating others, even without direct reinforcement or punishment for their own actions.
Learning by watching.
Exactly. It powerfully showed that observation and imitation are incredibly potent forms of learning, expanding beyond the strict SR stimulus-response framework of pure behaviorism by integrating cognitive elements like attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation.
The impact of this study was profound, fundamentally shifting psychology's focus beyond pure conditioning by integrating the crucial role of cognitive processes and social contexts. It also had immediate, far-reaching social implications.
Like concerns about TV violence.
Precisely. Raising widespread concerns about the potential effects of media violence on children, a debate that continues to this day. Positively, it equally demonstrated that pro-social behaviors like cooperation and empathy can also be powerfully learned by modeling. The Bobo doll experiment vividly demonstrated that children are incredibly perceptive sponges for the actions of their role models, highlighting the immense responsibility of parents, educators, and media creators.
And Bandura had other big ideas too, right?
He did. Furthermore, Bandura's broader work introduced the crucial concept of self-efficacy, one's belief in their own capability to succeed in specific situations or achieve particular outcomes. This concept has become foundational in diverse fields, from health psychology to education, showing that our beliefs about our own capabilities are central to how we approach challenges and ultimately act. He also introduced reciprocal determinism, highlighting how our individual thoughts and feelings, our behavior, and our environment all constantly influence and shape each other in a continuous dynamic loop.
Now, for one of the most chilling and arguably most influential studies in social psychology, a true ethical watershed, Milgram's obedience experiment.
A shock experiment. Yeah, this one's heavy.
It is. In the early 1960s, Stanley Milgram conducted this series of experiments at Yale University, profoundly inspired by the Holocaust and the question of how ordinary people could commit such atrocities simply by just following orders. His aim was to empirically explore the limits of obedience to authority.
So participants thought they were shocking someone.
Yes. Participants, who were volunteers recruited for what they believed was a study on memory and learning, were assigned the role of teacher and instructed by an experimenter in a lab coat to administer increasingly powerful electric shocks to a learner who was actually a Confederate or actor for incorrect answers.
The setup was ingeniously deceptive. The shock generator was a realistic-looking machine with labels ranging from slight shock up to danger, severe shock, and a menacing XXX at 450 volts. The learner was in an adjacent room, pre-recorded protests escalating as the voltage supposedly increased grunts, cries of pain, pleas to stop, and eventually ominous silence.
And if the teacher hesitated,
When participants hesitated, the experimenter, maintaining a calm and firm demeanor, would issue verbal prods such as, "Please continue," or "The experiment requires you to continue," or "You have no other choice, you must go on."
And the result was shocking, literally and figuratively.
It was the astonishing, almost unbelievable result. Approximately 65% of participants, ordinary men from various backgrounds, went all the way to the maximum 450 volts, despite showing clear signs of extreme distress, anxiety, and moral conflict, such as sweating, trembling, nervous laughter, and even seizures. They continued largely because the authority figure calmly insisted.
Milgram's findings sent shockwaves through the public and academia alike, forcing a difficult confrontation with human nature. It powerfully demonstrated the profound influence of perceived authority on ordinary people's behavior, showing that decent, well-meaning individuals could be compelled to inflict apparent harm when instructed by an authority figure.
It wasn't about them being bad people.
No, it taught us a sobering lesson. People were not necessarily evil or pathologically abnormal. Rather, the deeply ingrained social conditioning to obey authority is extraordinarily strong, and under the right situational pressures, particularly gradual escalation and diffusion of responsibility, most individuals would follow orders even against their personal conscience.
This experiment spurred an intense, vital re-examination of ethical standards in psychological research, leading directly to the establishment of stricter ethical guidelines by organizations like the American Psychological Association, APA. These new rules emphasize paramount principles like informed consent, the right to withdraw from a study at any time without penalty, and thorough debriefing.
So it had a big impact on how research is done.
Huge. Milgram's study has been instrumental in helping to explain real-world atrocities and instances of unquestioning compliance, just following orders. It continues to be cited and debated whenever we discuss the delicate balance between external authority and personal agency, serving as a powerful, unsettling reminder of the profound impact of social context on individual morality and behavior. It underscored that the situation, not just individual disposition, can be a tremendously powerful force.
Another incredibly impactful and, again, highly controversial study is the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Zimbardo's prison study, another famous and ethically thorny one.
Right. In 1971, social psychologist Philip Zimbardo and his colleagues at Stanford University simulated a prison environment to investigate how deeply social roles and situational expectations influence human behavior. 24 healthy male college students, carefully screened for psychological stability, were randomly assigned to be either prisoners or guards in a mock prison constructed in the university basement.
The results were drastic and alarmingly rapid. The guards, who were given uniforms, mirrored sunglasses to obscure their eyes, and batons, quickly became authoritarian and psychologically abusive, resorting to demeaning rituals, arbitrary rules, and psychological punishments. They adopted their roles with surprising zeal.
We got really into the role.
They did. The prisoners, in turn, exhibited extreme stress, despair, and disorganization. Some experienced severe emotional breakdowns, crying uncontrollably or suffering from psychosomatic rashes. Zimbardo himself, acting as the prison superintendent, later admitted he became too absorbed and biased by his role, losing his objective scientific distance.
And they had to stop it early.
Yes. The experiment, which was originally meant to last 2 weeks, had to be dramatically halted after only 6 days because the environment had grown dangerously abusive and emotionally damaging to the participants.
The Stanford Prison Experiment dramatically illustrated the potent concept of situational power, how ordinary, psychologically healthy individuals can conform to brutal or submissive roles far beyond initial expectations when placed in a powerful, immersive social context.
The power of the situation again.
Exactly. It provided compelling, albeit ethically problematic, support for the idea that situations and the roles we inhabit, more than individual personality traits or dispositions, can drive highly reprehensible or extreme behavior. It showed that given the right circumstances, almost anyone could be influenced to act in ways they never imagined.
This deeply disturbing study raised fundamental and enduring ethical concerns about the nature of psychological research, profoundly contributing to the development of much stricter experimental protocols and independent oversight boards, institutional review boards or IRBs, to protect human participants.
It's cited in relation to real-world abuses too, right?
Frequently. It has been cited in discussions of abuses in real-world institutions, such as the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, serving as a stock warning about the corrupting influence of unchecked power and the dehumanizing effects of roles. Ultimately, it taught us a crucial lesson. When people are given power without sufficient oversight or accountability, and others are placed in powerless, dehumanized positions, abusive dynamics can quickly emerge.
Not necessarily because they're bad people.
Not necessarily from inherent evil intent, but from a powerful conformity to expected roles and situational pressures. This leads to a critical question for society. How do we structure systems to prevent such abuses and foster humane interactions, even in hierarchical contexts? It powerfully underscores the critical importance of context, oversight, and ethical boundaries in any human system.
Behind these profound, big ideas and landmark discoveries stand the intellectual trailblazers, the visionary minds who not only forged the path for psychology as a science, but whose individual contributions continue to resonate today. Let's shine a light on some of the most influential figures who fundamentally shaped our understanding of the human mind and behavior.
These figures were not just researchers, they were pioneers who meticulously developed groundbreaking theories, conducted meticulous research, and applied psychological knowledge in ways that directly helped others. Their collective work has profoundly shaped the entire field as we know it today, providing both the conceptual tools and the empirical methods for understanding the human experience.
We begin, of course, with Sigmund Freud, 1856-1939, the controversial yet undeniably revolutionary founder of psychoanalysis. We've touched on him.
But he's central.
Absolutely. He introduced the radical paradigm-shifting idea that much of human behavior is not consciously chosen, but is instead driven by powerful unconscious motives, deep-seated conflicts, and formative childhood experiences. He proposed that personality is composed of three interacting psychic structures: the pleasure-seeking id, the reality-oriented ego, and the moralistic superego.
Freud's immense contribution was fundamentally changing how we conceive of the mind, introducing the profound concept that vast portions of our mental life operate entirely outside our conscious awareness. He also pioneered the concept of talk therapy as a method for treating psychological distress, essentially inventing psychotherapy as we know it.
His influence is huge, even outside psychology.
Definitely. His influence stretches far beyond academic psychology. Terms like Freudian slip and ego defense have become deeply embedded in popular culture, reflecting the widespread impact of his notion that hidden psychological forces subtly, yet profoundly, influence our everyday thoughts and behaviors. He forced us to look inward and consider the complex, often hidden depths of the human psyche.
Next, we turn to B.F. Skinner, 1904-1990, the leading and most influential figure of behaviorism, often called the master of reinforcement.
Back to behaviorism's giant.
Right. Skinner rigorously believed that psychology should exclusively focus on observable behavior, which he saw as almost entirely determined by its consequences specifically, reinforcements that increase behavior and punishments that decrease it. He famously invented the Skinner box, a meticulously controlled environment used to study operant conditioning in animals, which allowed him to demonstrate with incredible precision how different schedules of reinforcement produce distinct and predictable patterns of behavior.
What's truly compelling here is how Skinner systematically showed that meticulously changing environmental contingencies, the precise patterns of rewards and punishments, can powerfully and predictably shape behavior. His radical views, articulated in works like Walden 2, influenced not only education but also broader societal thinking about control and human nature.
He was ranked as highly influential.
Yes, he was even ranked the most influential psychologist of the 20th century in a 2002 survey of psychologists. His legacy is particularly strong in applied behavior analysis, ABA, a therapeutic approach that utilizes his operant conditioning techniques to address behavioral challenges, notably in areas like autism intervention, demonstrating the powerful practical applications of behaviorist principles. Skinner's work fundamentally challenged traditional notions of free will, arguing that our choices are largely products of our learning history and environmental contingencies.
Then there's Jean Piaget, 1896-1980, the groundbreaking Swiss psychologist who fundamentally revolutionized our understanding of cognitive development in children.
The child development expert.
Exactly. His most famous insight, gained through meticulous observation and creative clinical interviews, was that children are not simply less knowledgeable versions of adults. They think in qualitatively different ways than adults, actively constructing their understanding of the world. He proposed 4 universal stages of cognitive development: the sensory-motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage, each characterized by distinct ways of thinking and problem-solving.
Piaget introduced critical concepts that are now pillars of developmental psychology, such as schema, mental frameworks for organizing information, assimilation, integrating new experiences into existing schemas, and accommodation, modifying schemas to incorporate new information.
Concepts still used today.
Absolutely. His findings transformed educational theory and practice, profoundly influencing how curricula are designed to align with what children are developmentally ready to understand at different ages. He fundamentally showed that children are active little scientists, constantly exploring, experimenting, and dynamically constructing their understanding of the world, rather than passively absorbing information. His work spurred immense research in child development and remains incredibly influential today.
Another giant whose work bridged different psychological perspectives is Albert Bandura, 1925-2021, best known for his social learning theory and the transformative Bobo doll experiment we discussed earlier.
Bridging behaviorism and cognition.
Right. He brilliantly challenged the strict confines of behaviorism by showing that observational learning is an incredibly powerful force in shaping behavior, demonstrating that individuals, particularly children, can acquire new behaviors simply by observing others, even without direct reinforcement or punishment for their own actions. He later expanded this into social cognitive theory, which includes his concept of reciprocal determinism.
That constant interaction between person, behavior, environment.
Exactly. Highlighting how our individual thoughts and feelings, our behavior, and our environment all constantly influence and shape each other in a continuous dynamic loop.
Bandura also introduced the incredibly influential concept of self-efficacy, one's belief in their own capability to succeed in specific situations or achieve particular outcomes. This idea has become absolutely fundamental in diverse fields, ranging from health psychology, motivating people to adopt healthier habits, to education, fostering academic achievement, and therapy.
Believing you can do it matters.
Hugely. His work showed that our beliefs about our own capabilities are central to how we approach challenges, persevere, and ultimately act. He effectively bridged behaviorism's focus on learning with cognitive psychology's emphasis on mental processes, creating a richer, more comprehensive understanding of human learning and motivation.
Finally, we highlight two leading figures who championed a profound shift in psychology's focus towards human potential and well-being. Carl Rogers, 1902-1987, and Abraham Maslow, 1908-1970, the intellectual architects of humanistic psychology.
The third force, leaders.
Right. Rogers developed client-centered therapy, a revolutionary approach that emphasized the therapist providing core conditions of genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding to empower clients to find their own solutions and move towards self-actualization. His focus was on the individual's self-concept and inherent drive for growth.
Very different from the psychoanalytic couch.
Very. Maslow is famous for his iconic hierarchy of needs, the pyramid model of human motivations ascending from basic physiological needs to safety, love, belonging, esteem, and finally, self-actualization, the profound drive to realize one's unique, fullest potential. He meticulously studied healthy, creative individuals as exemplars of human flourishing, not just those with pathology.
What's truly transformative about Rogers and Maslow's work is how they decisively shifted psychology's focus away from solely studying illness and dysfunction towards exploring human health, growth, and potential. They passionately argued that humans aren't just driven by unconscious urges or mechanical conditioning. We are also driven by an innate, powerful desire for personal growth, meaning, creativity, and self-fulfillment.
A more positive view of human nature.
Definitely. Their profound influence is readily seen across various domains today, from modern counseling and psychotherapy, where client empowerment and empathy are central, to educational philosophies that prioritize holistic development, and even in management and organizational leadership, where understanding intrinsic motivation and fostering employee growth are crucial for success. They laid the philosophical and practical groundwork for what is now known as positive psychology.
Okay, so pulling it all together.
To synthesize the overarching impact of this deep dive, psychology has, over its relatively short history as a science, painstakingly built a comprehensive and nuanced picture of human beings as profoundly biopsychosocial organisms.
Biopsychosocial, I like that.
Right. Our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, and our experiences are never the result of a single factor. Instead, they emerge from incredibly complex interactions between our biology, our brain structures, our genes, our neurotransmitters, our hormones, intricate psychological factors like our unique perceptions, our thought patterns, our emotions, our memories, and even those often unconscious drives we discussed.
And the social part.
And crucially, they are shaped by powerful social influences, including the culture we are born into, the dynamics within our families, the specific roles we inhabit, and the immediate situations we find ourselves in. A compelling aspect here is how no single factor ever operates in isolation.
Like aggression, for example.
Exactly. To truly understand something as complex as aggression, we can now recognize its biological influences. PG, brain regions, hormones, cognitive factors, example, hostile attribution bias, developmental aspects, for example, early trauma, social triggers, for example, peer pressure, cultural norms, and even deep evolutionary roots, so resource competition. This sophisticated, multifaceted understanding is a direct result of the rich interplay between psychology's diverse subfields and its various theoretical perspectives.
And the major theoretical frameworks we've explored have each left an indelible, transformative legacy, forever altering how we view the human condition. Psychoanalytic ideas, though extensively modified over time, undeniably brought critical attention to the profound importance of early childhood experiences and the pervasive existence of unconscious mental processes that shape our lives.
The hidden depths.
Right. Behaviorism, with its rigorous empirical focus, taught us the sheer power of learning and environmental contingencies, leading to incredibly practical and effective techniques that have improved education, parenting strategies, and therapeutic interventions, such as systematically overcoming phobias or building positive habits.
Real-world tools.
Humanistic psychology courageously reoriented the field towards exploring human health, well-being, and innate potential, enriching therapy with greater empathy and serving as the intellectual wellspring for the burgeoning field of positive psychology.
Focusing on flourishing.
The cognitive revolution, in turn, gave us a far deeper, more scientific understanding of our own intricate thinking processes. Terms like attention span, cognitive bias, and mental shortcuts are now common parlance in everyday language. It also directly spurred the development of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Which we know is hugely effective.
Exactly. Overwhelming research has shown it to be incredibly effective for a wide range of mental health disorders by empowering individuals to identify and reframe maladaptive thought patterns. And evolutionary psychology has provided profound, ultimate insights into why certain universal human behaviors and mental predispositions might have developed over vast periods of time, helping us understand the adaptive logic behind some of our deepest instincts.
This leads to a crucial question that impacts all of us. How has all this accumulating psychological knowledge truly changed our daily lives? Psychology has profoundly permeated everyday language and thought terms like identity crisis, IQ, emotional intelligence, attachment style, and self-efficacy all originate from psychological research.
We use these terms all the time without maybe realizing their origin.
Exactly. It has furnished us with an incredibly robust and nuanced framework to better understand not only ourselves, but also the motivations and behaviors of others. Parents now use evidence-based attachment research to foster more secure bonds with their babies. Organizations strategically use principles from social psychology to craft more effective campaigns or foster collaborative teams, and individuals like you can use psychological principles to enhance their personal well-being, from applying mindfulness practices for stress reduction to embracing growth mindset principles for tackling challenging goals.
So it's practical for everyone.
It really is. Crucially, psychology's unwavering commitment to scientific methodology and understanding behavior is one of its most profound contributions. Through rigorous, systematic experimentation, longitudinal studies, and advanced neuroscientific measures, psychology has tirelessly debunked persistent myths like the simplistic idea of completely distinct left brain versus right brain personalities.
Oh, that's a myth?
Largely, yes. Or the long-held belief that venting anger is always a healthy cathartic release.
Interesting.
Instead, it has consistently provided evidence-based practices, demonstrating, for example, that exposure therapy can profoundly and effectively treat phobias by applying the principles of extinction from classical conditioning, or that cognitive behavioral therapy can induce measurable changes in brain activity in individuals struggling with depression, much like certain medications.
So what does this entire deep dive into the human mind truly mean for you, the listener? Psychology's grand ideas across all its diverse lenses teach us a fundamental humility that our minds, despite their incredible power, can err in systematic, predictable ways and are susceptible to unconscious biases and situational pressures.
We're not always rational.
Definitely not. They cultivate a deeper empathy, helping us understand that behavior often has far deeper, more complex roots than initially meets the eye, shaped by biology, personal history, and social context. And perhaps most importantly, they offer us a profound sense of hope that people possess an incredible capacity to change, to learn, to grow, and to overcome challenges, given the right conditions and insights.
There's potential for change.
Absolutely. As this fascinating field continues its rapid advancement, it constantly refines, challenges, and expands our understanding of the incredibly complex, ever-unfolding puzzle of mind and behavior. As you reflect on this journey, what stands out most powerfully to you from this deep dive into the human condition? And how might understanding these big ideas and scientific discoveries subtly, or perhaps dramatically, change your perspective as you navigate your own life and interact with the people around you moving forward?
Yeah, it's worth thinking about. Each perspective really emphasizes different aspects of human behavior. Together, these perspectives give us a much more well-rounded understanding of why we do the things we do.